David wiped the sweat from his forehead as he stepped out of the small diner where he worked his second job. The clock on the wall showed 9:30 p.m., and his feet ached from standing behind the counter for 6 straight hours. He pulled his worn jacket tighter around his shoulders as the cool evening air hit him. Tomorrow would bring another early morning at his first job at the warehouse, but tonight, all he wanted was to get home to his 2 kids. As he walked down the familiar street, toward his apartment, David's mind wandered to the stack of bills sitting on his kitchen table. The rent was due in 3 days and he was still $50 short. His phone had been buzzing all week with calls from the electric company, but he kept ignoring them. Maybe if he picked up a few extra shifts at the diner, he could catch up. Maybe. The park came into view, its old swings creaking softly in the breeze. Most people avoided this area after dark, but David had been taking this shortcut for months. It saved him 10 minutes of walking, and every minute mattered when he had to pick up his children from Mrs. Rodriguez next door. That's when he saw her. A small figure sat hunched on one of the wooden benches near the playground. At first, David thought it might be a teenager, but as he got closer, he realized it was just a little girl. She couldn't have been older than 7, maybe 8. Her dark hair fell around her face like a curtain, and her tiny shoulders shook with quiet sobs. David stopped walking. Every instinct told him to keep going. He had his own problems, his own kids to worry about. But something about the way she sat there, so small and alone in the growing darkness, made his heart ache. He looked around the empty park. No adults in sight. No one calling for a lost child. Just this little girl crying by herself while the world went on around her. David approached slowly, not wanting to scare her. He'd learned from raising his own daughter that sudden movements could frighten children, especially when they were already upset. "Hey there," he said softly, stopping a few feet away from the bench. "Are you okay?" The little girl looked up, and David's breath caught in his throat. Her eyes were red from crying, but they were also filled with fear. Real, deep fear that no child should ever have to experience. Her dress, which must have been beautiful once, was now torn at the sleeve and stained with dirt. "I'm lost," she whispered, her voice so quiet David had to lean forward to hear her. "I can't find my way home." David knelt down to her level, making sure to keep some distance so she wouldn't feel trapped. "My name is David. What's your name?" "Sweetheart?" "Isabella," she said, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "I was with my nanny at the shopping center, but then there were so many people and I got scared and I ran, and now I don't know where I am." David nodded, trying to piece together what had happened. The nearest shopping center was almost 2 miles away. This little girl had wandered quite far from where she started. "How long have you been sitting here, Isabella?" he asked gently. She shrugged, more tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know. The sun was still up when I got here. I thought someone would come find me, but nobody came." David's heart broke a little more. This child had been sitting here, alone for hours, waiting for someone to rescue her. He pulled out his phone to check the time. It was almost 10 o'clock now. If she'd been here since before sunset, she'd been waiting for at least 2.5 hours. "Are you hungry?" David asked, noticing how thin she looked. Isabella nodded shyly. "A little bit." David reached into his pocket and pulled out the granola bar he'd been saving for his walk home. It wasn't much, but it was something. He handed it to her, and she took it with both hands like it was the most precious thing in the world. "Thank you," she whispered, before taking a small bite. As Isabella ate, David studied her more carefully. Her dress, despite being dirty now, was clearly expensive. The fabric looked like silk and there were tiny pearls sewn along the neckline. Her shoes were patent leather, the kind that probably cost more than David made in a week. Even her hair tie looked fancy, with a small diamond-like stone in the center. This was a wealthy child, David realized. Someone's precious little girl from one of the nice neighborhoods across town. Her family was probably worried sick. "Isabella, do you remember your address? Or your phone number?" David asked. She shook her head sadly. "I know my house is really big, and it has a long driveway with big gates. There are lots of flowers in the front yard, but I don't know the street name." David tried a different approach. "What about your parents? Do you know their names or where they work?" Isabella's face crumpled and fresh tears started flowing. "My mommy and daddy died in a car accident last year. I live with my grandfather now." The words hit David like a punch to the stomach. This poor child had already lost so much, and now she was lost and scared on top of everything else. "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," David said softly. "That must be very hard." Isabella nodded, wiping her eyes again. "Grandfather is always busy with work. He has lots of meetings and phone calls. The nanny takes care of me most of the time, but she doesn't really like to play games or read stories. She mostly just watches TV." David felt a familiar pang in his chest. He knew what it was like to be busy all the time, to feel like you never had enough hours in the day for your children. But at least his kids knew they were loved. This little girl sounded lonely in a way that had nothing to do with being lost. "Well, we need to get you home to your grandfather," David said, standing up. "I'm going to call the police and they'll help us find him." But when David dialed 911, the operator told him they were dealing with multiple emergencies and couldn't send an officer for at least 3 hours. David looked at Isabella, who was shivering now in the cool night air, and knew he couldn't leave her sitting on this bench for 3 more hours. "Okay, here's what we're going to do," David said, making a decision that would change both their lives. "We're going to walk around and see if you recognize anything. And if we can't find your house tonight, you can stay with me and my kids until morning. How does that sound?" Isabella's eyes widened with hope. "Really? You would do that?" "Of course," David said, even though his mind was already racing with concerns. He didn't have extra food at home. He didn't have an extra bed. His apartment was tiny and cluttered, but none of that mattered right now. "Come on," he said, extending his hand. "Let's see if we can find your way home." Isabella slipped her small hand into his, and together they walked out of the park, into the night. David had no idea that this simple act of kindness would soon bring a luxury car to his doorstep and change his family's life forever. All he knew was that a child needed help, and he was going to do whatever it took to get her safely home. David and Isabella walked hand in hand down the quiet streets, their footsteps echoing softly on the empty sidewalks. The streetlights cast long shadows as they moved from block to block, David hoping that something would look familiar to the little girl beside him. "Does any of this look like the way you came?" David asked gently, pointing to the row of small houses they were passing. Isabella shook her head, her grip tightening on his hand. "Everything looks different in the dark, and I was running really fast because I was scared." David understood. When you're frightened and running, you don't pay attention to landmarks or street signs. You just run until you can't run anymore. He squeezed her hand reassuringly. They turned onto Main Street where a few shops were still open. The bright lights from the grocery store and the gas station made Isabella blink after walking in the dim residential areas. "Let's try asking some people," David suggested, leading her toward the grocery store. Inside, the fluorescent lights seemed almost blinding. David approached the teenage cashier, a boy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else than working. "The late shift." "Excuse me," David said. "Have you seen anyone looking for a lost little girl tonight? Maybe someone came by asking questions." The cashier barely looked up from his phone. "Nah, man, been pretty quiet tonight." David felt his first wave of real worry. If Isabella had been missing for hours, surely someone would be out looking for her by now. Unless they didn't know where to look, they tried the gas station next. The older man behind the counter was more helpful, but he hadn't seen anyone searching for a child either. He did let David use the store phone to call the police again, but the story was the same. Multiple emergencies, short-staffed, several hours before an officer could respond. "Maybe we should try the fancy neighborhoods," Isabella said quietly, as they left the gas station. "My house is really big. Bigger than any house we've seen so far." David nodded. That made sense. They started walking toward the wealthier part of town, about 15 minutes away. As they walked, Isabella began to open up more. "My grandfather has a lot of cars," she said. "Black ones mostly. And there are men who work for him who wear suits all the time. What kind of work does your grandfather do? David asked, curious about what kind of business required that level of security. I don't really know, Isabella admitted. He's always in his office talking on the phone in different languages. Sometimes he speaks Spanish, sometimes something else I don't understand. People come to visit him and they all dress up really nice. As they entered the upscale neighborhood, David felt out of place. The houses here were enormous, with perfect lawns and expensive cars in the driveways. Some had gates and security cameras. This was a different world from his small apartment building. Do any of these look familiar? David asked. But Isabella was already shaking her head before he finished the question. They walked for another hour, going up and down different streets. David's feet were getting sore, and he could tell Isabella was getting tired too. She was starting to stumble occasionally, and her steps were getting slower. I'm sorry, Isabella said suddenly, stopping in the middle of the sidewalk. I'm causing you so much trouble. Maybe you should just leave me at the police station and go home to your family. David knelt down in front of her, looking into her tired eyes. Hey, don't say that. You're not causing trouble. Sometimes bad things happen and we just have to help each other through them. But you probably have important things to do. Isabella said, her voice small and sad. David thought about his own kids, who were probably already asleep at Mrs. Rodriguez's house. He thought about the bills on his kitchen table and the early shift he had to work tomorrow. But looking at this scared little girl, none of that seemed as important as making sure she was safe. The most important thing I can do right now is help you get home, David said firmly. That's what people should do for each other. Isabella smiled for the first time since he'd found her, and it made all the walking and worry worth it. They continued searching, but as the night grew later, it became clear they weren't going to find her house tonight. David's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Rodriguez asking if he was okay since he was so late picking up his kids. He realized he had to make a difficult decision. Isabella, David said carefully, I think we need to stop looking for tonight. It's getting really late and I need to get my children. But I have an idea. Isabella looked up at him with hope in her eyes. How would you feel about spending the night at my house? I know it's not what you're used to, but you'll be safe there. And tomorrow, when it's light outside, we can look for your grandfather again. Isabella nodded eagerly. I'd like that. I don't want to be alone anymore tonight. David felt a mixture of relief and worry. Relief that Isabella trusted him enough to come home with him, but worry about how he was going to manage. His apartment was small, with only one bedroom that his two kids shared. He slept on the couch in the living room. Where would Isabella sleep? And what would they eat for breakfast? His refrigerator was nearly empty, but as they walked toward his neighborhood, David realized that Isabella had never asked about any of those things. She hadn't complained about being tired or hungry or scared. She was just grateful that someone cared enough to help her. Can I ask you something? Isabella said as they turned onto David Street. Of course. Do you have kids? I do, David said with a smile. I have a daughter who's 8 and a son who's 6. They're going to be excited to meet you. Really? Isabella asked, her whole face lighting up. I've never had friends my age before. The kids at my private school don't really talk to me much. They think I'm weird because I'm always by myself. David felt another pang of sadness for this little girl. Money couldn't buy everything, especially not friendship and happiness. Well, my kids love making new friends, David assured her, and they're really good at sharing and playing games. As they climbed the stairs to David's apartment building, Isabella looked around with curiosity rather than judgment. She didn't seem bothered by the peeling paint or the dim hallway lights. She was just interested in everything around her. This is different from where I live, she said, but it feels warmer somehow. David understood what she meant. His building might not be fancy, but it was filled with families who looked out for each other. Mrs. Rodriguez wasn't just a neighbor, she was like family. The kids played together in the courtyard. People shared food when times were tough, and so David knocked on Mrs. Rodriguez's door to collect his children. He wondered how he was going to explain bringing home a lost little girl. But he also found himself looking forward to seeing how his kids would react to having a new friend for the night. What David didn't know was that this decision to bring Isabella home would set in motion events that would change all their lives, in ways he never could have imagined. Mrs. Rodriguez opened her door with a concerned look on her face. She was a kind woman in her 60s who had been watching David's children for over a year whenever his work schedules overlapped. "David, I was getting worried," she said, then noticed Isabella standing beside him. Her expression immediately softened. "And who is this little angel?" "This is Isabella," David explained quickly. "She got lost and we couldn't find her family tonight. I was hoping she could stay with us until morning." Mrs. Rodriguez didn't hesitate. "Of course, mijo, come in, come in." She ushered them both inside her warm apartment that always smelled like fresh bread and coffee. David's two children, Lily and Ryan, were curled up on Mrs. Rodriguez's couch watching a cartoon. When they saw their father, they jumped up and ran to hug him. "Daddy," Lily called out, wrapping her arms around his waist. "We thought you forgot about us." "I would never forget about you two," David said, hugging them both tightly. "But I want you to meet someone special. This is Isabella. She's going to stay with us tonight." Ryan, who was always curious about everything, immediately walked up to Isabella with a big smile. "Hi, I'm Ryan. I'm 6 years old. How old are you?" Isabella seemed surprised by his friendly approach. "I'm 7, she said shyly. "Cool. Do you like cartoons?" Ryan asked, grabbing her hand. "We're watching one about talking animals. You can watch with us." Lily, who was a bit more cautious than her brother, studied Isabella carefully. "Are you really lost?" she asked with concern. "That must be really scary." Isabella nodded. "It was scary, but your daddy found me and helped me." Something in Isabella's voice made Lily's protective instincts kick in. "Well, you don't have to be scared anymore. We'll take care of you tonight." David felt his heart swell with pride watching his children immediately welcome Isabella. Mrs. Rodriguez packed up the kids' backpacks and handed David a container of leftover soup. "For dinner," she explained with a knowing look. "Growing children need to eat." David thanked her gratefully. Mrs. Rodriguez always seemed to know when his grocery money was running low. The walk to their apartment was different than usual. Instead of tired silence, the children chattered excitedly. Ryan was telling Isabella about his favorite toys, while Lily was explaining how their bedtime routine worked. "We brush our teeth together and then Daddy reads us a story," Lily said. "Do you like stories?" "I love stories," Isabella replied. "But nobody really reads to me anymore. I mostly read by myself." When they reached David's apartment, he felt embarrassed about how small it was. The living room, kitchen, and dining area were all one space. The couch where he slept every night was covered with folded laundry he hadn't had time to put away. Toys were scattered across the floor from when the kids had played there yesterday morning, but Isabella didn't seem to notice any of that. Instead, she was fascinated by how cozy everything felt. "It's so warm in here," she said, looking around with wonder. "And there are pictures everywhere." She was right. The walls were covered with drawings that Lily and Ryan had made, photos of family, trips to the local park, and certificates from school activities. It wasn't expensive art, but it was filled with love and memories. "Those are our masterpieces," Ryan said proudly, pointing to a particularly colorful drawing of what might have been a dinosaur. "I made that one last week." While David heated up Mrs. Rodriguez's soup, the children showed Isabella around their small home. They took her to their bedroom, which had bunk beds and toys organized in plastic bins. Isabella ran her fingers along the handmade quilt that covered the bottom bunk. "My grandmother made that before she passed away," Lily explained. "It's the softest blanket in the whole world." "It's beautiful," Isabella said softly. "I have lots of expensive blankets, but none of them were made by someone who loved me." David overheard this comment from the kitchen and felt his chest tighten. How could a child so young already understand the difference between things bought with money and things made with love? During dinner, Isabella was amazed by how the family interacted. David asked each child about their day, listened to their stories, and helped Ryan when he spilled soup on his shirt. Nobody seemed stressed or in a hurry. They just enjoyed being together. At my house, I usually eat dinner by myself while my nanny watches her phone, Isabella shared. Sometimes my grandfather joins me, but he's always reading papers or talking on his phone about work. That sounds lonely, Lily said with sympathy. It is lonely, Isabella admitted. But this is nice. It feels like what I see on TV shows about families. After dinner, David faced the challenge of bath time and sleeping arrangements. They only had one bathroom, and he wasn't sure how to handle giving Isabella a bath when he barely knew her. Lily solved the problem. Isabella can take a bath with me, she announced. I'll help her wash her hair and we can use my special strawberry shampoo. While the girls were in the bathroom, David could hear them laughing and splashing. Isabella kept saying things like, I've never shared a bath before and this is so much fun. Ryan sat with David on the couch, building a tower with his blocks. Dad, why doesn't Isabella have any friends? He asked innocently. David thought carefully about how to answer. Sometimes, when people have a lot of money, they live differently than we do. Isabella probably goes to a school where the kids don't know how to be good friends yet. That's sad, Ryan said. Everyone should have friends. When the girls finished their bath, David realized he didn't have any extra pajamas that would fit Isabella. Lily immediately offered to share. You can wear my favorite nightgown, Lily said, pulling out a soft pink nightgown with cartoon cats on it. It might be a little big, but it's really comfortable. Isabella put on the nightgown, which was indeed too big for her, and looked at herself in the small mirror above David's dresser. I look like a real kid, she said with delight. You are a real kid, Ryan said, confused. I mean a normal kid, Isabella clarified, not a fancy kid. For bedtime, David set up a makeshift bed on the floor using extra blankets and pillows. But the children had other ideas. Isabella should sleep in my bed, Lily declared. We can have a sleepover. Can I sleep on the floor too? Ryan asked. Like we're camping. David ended up with all three children sleeping on the bedroom floor, giggling and whispering long after they should have been asleep. He listened from the living room as Isabella told them about her big house with empty rooms and how she sometimes got lost just walking from her bedroom to the kitchen. If you lived here, you'd never get lost, Ryan said sleepily. Our whole house is just 4 rooms. I wish I could live here. Isabella whispered so quietly, David almost didn't hear her. Eventually, the apartment grew quiet. David lay on his couch, staring at the ceiling and thinking about the day's events. He'd found a lost child and brought her home without really thinking about the consequences. What if her family thought he'd kidnapped her? What if they blamed him for not finding her sooner? But then he thought about Isabella's smile when Lily shared her shampoo, and Ryan's immediate acceptance of a new friend, and how Isabella had said, his small apartment felt warmer than her mansion. Sometimes the most important things in life couldn't be planned. Sometimes you just had to trust that doing the right thing would lead to the right outcome. As David finally drifted off to sleep, he had no idea that tomorrow would bring answers to questions he didn't even know he should be asking. David woke, up to the sound of children's laughter coming from the bedroom. For a moment, he forgot about Isabella and wondered why his kids were up so early. Then everything came flooding back. The lost little girl, the long search, the impromptu sleepover. On the bedroom floor, he checked his phone. It was already 7:30 a.m. He had called in sick to his warehouse job the night before, but he felt guilty about missing another day's pay. Still, getting Isabella home safely was more important than anything else right now. The laughter from the bedroom grew louder, followed by Ryan's voice saying, "Show us again. Show us again." David got up from the couch and peeked into the bedroom. Isabella was teaching Lily and Ryan some kind of dance, moving her arms gracefully while they tried to copy her movements. She looked completely different from the scared, crying child he'd found on the park bench. This morning she was confident and happy, her face glowing with joy. "Good morning, everyone," David said from the doorway. "Daddy," Ryan called out. "Isabella knows how to do ballet. She's teaching us." "I had lessons for 3 years," Isabella explained, doing a small spin that made Lily clap with delight. "But I never had anyone to practice with before." David smiled, watching his children attempt ballet moves in their pajamas. That's wonderful, but we need to get you home to your grandfather. I'm sure he's very worried about you. Isabella's face fell slightly, but she nodded. I know. I've never had this much fun before. After a simple breakfast of toast and scrambled eggs, David helped all 3 children get dressed. Isabella had to wear Lily's clothes since her fancy dress from yesterday was torn and dirty. She looked at herself in the mirror, wearing Lily's jeans and t-shirt with a cartoon unicorn on it. I look so normal, Isabella said, and David could tell she meant it as a compliment. They started their search in the wealthy neighborhood they'd explored the night before. But this time, Isabella was more alert and focused. The morning sunlight made everything look different, and she began recognizing small details she'd missed in the darkness. That fountain, Isabella suddenly exclaimed, pointing to an ornate stone fountain in the center of a small park. I remember that fountain. My nanny and I walked past it yesterday. David felt a surge of hope. They were getting closer. They followed the streets around the park, with Isabella growing more excited as more landmarks became familiar. A particular mailbox shaped like a house, a tree with unusual purple flowers, a statue of a dog in someone's front yard. We're really close now, Isabella said, practically bouncing with excitement. I think it's just a few more blocks. But as they turned the corner onto Oakwood Avenue, Isabella suddenly stopped walking. Her face went pale and she grabbed David's hand tightly. There it is, she whispered, pointing to an enormous house at the end of the street. David's mouth fell open. This wasn't just a big house, it was a mansion, the kind of place he'd only seen in movies or magazines. A long, circular driveway led up to a massive white house with tall columns and perfectly manicured gardens. The property was surrounded by an iron gate that looked like it belonged to a palace. Isabella, are you sure this is your house? David asked, suddenly feeling very out of place in his work clothes and old sneakers. I'm sure, Isabella said quietly. See the rose garden on the left side? And those big windows on the second floor? That's my bedroom. As they approached the gate, David noticed security cameras mounted on tall posts. Before he could even reach for the intercom button, a voice crackled through a speaker. Isabella! Oh my God, Isabella! The massive gates began to swing open immediately. David saw several men in dark suits running toward them from the house. Behind them, an older man with silver hair was moving as fast as his age would allow. Grandfather, Isabella called out, letting go of David's hand and running toward the silver-haired man. The reunion was emotional and overwhelming. Isabella's grandfather dropped to his knees and pulled her into a tight hug, tears streaming down his face. He held her like he thought she might disappear again if he let go. My darling girl, he said in a voice thick with emotion. I was so scared that... David watched from a distance, feeling like an intruder in this private moment. Several of the men in suits were talking rapidly into their phones, probably calling off search teams. Others were asking Isabella gentle questions about where she'd been and if she was hurt. After several minutes, Isabella's grandfather looked up and noticed David standing awkwardly by the gate. Isabella tugged on her grandfather's sleeve and pointed at David. Grandfather, this is David. He's the one who found me and took care of me all night. The older man stood up slowly and walked toward David. He was tall and distinguished looking, with intelligent eyes and an expensive suit that probably cost more than David made in 6 months. David felt intimidated and wondered if he should have just dropped Isabella at the gate and left. Sir, the man said, extending his hand. I am Vincent Morales. I cannot begin to express my gratitude for what you've done. David shook his hand, surprised by the warmth in Vincent's voice. I'm David Chen. I just did what anyone would do. Vincent's eyes filled with tears again. No, Mr. Chen. Not everyone would do what you did. Most people would have called the police and walked away. You gave up your time, your resources, your own family's needs to care for a stranger's child. She was scared and alone, David said simply. I couldn't just leave her. One of the men in suits approached Vincent and whispered something in his ear. Vincent nodded and turned back to David. Mr. Chen, I'd like you to know that we had every police officer in the city looking for Isabella. We had private investigators, security teams, even helicopters searching. But somehow you were the one who found her. David felt uncomfortable with all the attention. I was just walking home from work. Right place, right time, I guess. Tell me everything, Vincent said. I want to know exactly how you cared for my granddaughter. So David told him about finding Isabella on the park bench, about their long search through the neighborhoods, about bringing her home to meet Lily and Ryan. He mentioned Mrs. Rodriguez's soup and Lily sharing her clothes and the children's impromptu sleepover on the bedroom floor. Vincent listened to every word, occasionally asking questions about details. When David mentioned that Isabella had seemed lonely and talked about eating dinner by herself, Vincent's face showed pain and guilt. She stayed in your home overnight? Vincent asked. With your children? Yes, sir. I hope that was okay. The police couldn't respond for hours, and I couldn't leave her alone. Okay? Vincent repeated. Mr. Chen, you welcomed a stranger's child into your family. You fed her, clothed her, gave her safety and comfort when she needed it most. Isabella had been listening to the conversation, and she suddenly spoke up. Grandfather, David's children are wonderful. Lily taught me how to braid hair, and Ryan showed me his toy car collection. We had so much fun together. Vincent looked at his granddaughter, really looked at her, and David could see him noticing things. How relaxed she seemed, how her eyes sparkled when she talked about Lily and Ryan, how she was standing closer to David than to him. Isabella, Vincent said gently, would you like Mr. Chen to come inside so we can thank him properly? But David was already shaking his head. That's not necessary, sir. I'm just glad she's safe. Please, Vincent insisted. At least let me repay you for the food, the clothing, the inconvenience. No payment necessary, David said firmly. Taking care of Isabella wasn't inconvenient. It was nice having her with us. As David turned to leave, Isabella ran to him and hugged him tightly around the waist. Thank you, David, she whispered. Thank you for making me feel like I belong somewhere. David hugged her back, his heart breaking a little at her words. You take care of yourself, Isabella, and remember what Lily and Ryan taught you about making friends. As David walked away from the mansion, he had no idea that Vincent Morales was already making phone calls that would bring them together again very soon. 3 days passed, and David tried to get back to his normal routine. He went to work at the warehouse, picked up shifts at the diner, and came home to help Lily and Ryan with their homework. But something felt different. The apartment seemed quieter than usual, and he often caught his children staring out the window as if they were waiting for someone. Do you think Isabella is okay? Lily asked on Tuesday evening while they were eating dinner. Do you think she misses us? I'm sure she's fine, David replied, though he wondered the same thing. She's back with her grandfather where she belongs. But what if she's lonely again? Ryan asked, pushing his mashed potatoes around his plate. What if nobody plays with her? David didn't know how to answer that question because he'd been thinking about it too. In just one night, Isabella had become part of their little family. Her absence left a gap that none of them had expected. On Wednesday morning, David was getting ready for his early shift at the warehouse when Mrs. Rodriguez knocked on his door. She looked excited and a little confused. David, mijo, there are some very fancy cars parked outside, she said, peering through his window. Black cars with tinted windows and men in suits. It looks like something from a movie. David's heart started racing. His first thought was that something was wrong. Maybe Vincent Morales thought David had done something inappropriate. Maybe there were legal problems he hadn't considered. He looked out the window and saw exactly what Mrs. Rodriguez had described. 2 luxury cars that looked like they cost more than he made in 5 years were parked in front of his building. Several men in expensive suits stood nearby, and David could see more people inside the cars. Stay here with the kids, David told Mrs. Rodriguez. I'll go see what they want. David's hands were shaking as he walked downstairs. Through the glass doors of his building, he could see Vincent Morales getting out of the first car. But what? Surprised him even more was seeing Isabella jump out of the second car and run toward the building. David opened the door just as Isabella reached it. She threw herself into his arms with a huge smile on her face. "David, I missed you so much," she said, squeezing him tight. "Isabella, what are you doing here?" David asked, though he was smiling despite his nervousness. Vincent approached them with a warm expression on his face. "Mr. Chen, I hope you don't mind us stopping by unannounced. Isabella has been asking about you and your children every day, since she came home." "Really?" David asked, looking down at Isabella, who was still holding onto his arm. "Every single day," Vincent confirmed. "She's told me all about Lily's unicorn shirts and Ryan's toy cars and Mrs. Rodriguez's soup. She's asked me at least 100 times if we could come visit you." David felt his nervousness beginning to fade. "Would you like to come upstairs? I'm sure Lily and Ryan would love to see Isabella." "Actually," Vincent said, "I was hoping we could sit down and talk, all of us together. I have something important to discuss with you." They went upstairs to David's small apartment, where Lily and Ryan nearly knocked Isabella over with their enthusiastic hugs. Mrs. Rodriguez immediately started fussing over everyone, offering coffee and the pastries she'd made that morning. Vincent looked around the apartment with the same expression Isabella had worn on her first night there. Not judgment, but curiosity and warmth. He studied the children's artwork on the walls and the family photos scattered throughout the room. "This is exactly how Isabella described it," Vincent said softly. "Full of love." While the children played. In the bedroom, Vincent and David sat at the small kitchen table. Mrs. Rodriguez had insisted on serving coffee in her best cups, and the smell of fresh pastries filled the air. "Mr. Chen," Vincent began, "I've spent the last 3 days learning everything I can about you." David's stomach dropped. "Sir, if I did something wrong—" No, Vincent said quickly, raising his hand. "Nothing like that. I learned about your work ethic, your character, your dedication to your children. I learned that you've been working 2 jobs to support your family, that you've never missed a day of work except when your children were sick, and that your neighbors describe you as the most helpful and honest person they know." David wasn't sure where this conversation was going, but he remained quiet and listened. "I also learned," Vincent continued, "that you're facing some financial difficulties. Late rent, overdue utility bills, no savings account." David felt his face burn with embarrassment. "Sir, I can handle my own problems. I don't need charity." "This isn't charity," Vincent said firmly. "This is recognition of something extraordinary you did for my family." Vincent reached into his jacket and pulled out some papers. "Isabella told me that she felt more loved and cared for in one night with your family than she has felt in months at home. That's not something I can ignore." David looked toward the bedroom where he could hear the children laughing together. Isabella's bright voice was mixing with Lily and Ryan's, and it sounded like they were putting on some kind of show. "The truth is," Vincent said, "I've been so focused on my business and my responsibilities that I forgot how to be a grandfather. I provide for Isabella financially, but I haven't been providing what she really needs." "She loves you," David said. "She was scared when she was lost, but she kept talking about wanting to get home to you." "I know she loves me," Vincent replied. "But love isn't enough if you don't know how to show it. Watching her with your children, seeing how happy she was, it made me realize how much I've been failing her." Vincent spread the papers out on the table. "Mr. Chen, I'd like to offer you a position with my company, head of security operations. The salary would be more than you make at both your current jobs combined, plus full health benefits for your family." David stared at the papers, unable to process what he was hearing. "I don't understand. I don't have any security experience." "Security isn't just about knowing how to fight or use technology," Vincent explained. "It's about being trustworthy, reliable, and caring about people's safety. You proved all of that when you took care of Isabella." "But David started to protest. "There's more," Vincent said gently. "The position comes with a housing allowance that would allow you to move to a larger apartment in a better neighborhood, close enough that Isabella could visit regularly if that's something you'd be open to." David felt overwhelmed. This was more than he'd ever dreamed possible. Why would you do all this? Vincent smiled. Because Isabella needs what your family gave her. She needs to understand what it means to be part of a real family. And honestly, I think I need to learn that too. Just then, the children came running out of the bedroom. Isabella was wearing one of Lily's tiaras, and Ryan had put on a cape made from a towel.